Hello, hello. We're live on Facebook now, so we're re-saying hello. I'm Melissa Giroux. I'm a mixed race mom, and among other things, I'm a co-founder of EmbraceRace.
And I'm Andrew Grant Thomas. I'm an African-American dad and also the co-founder of EmbraceRace. Actually, we're mom and dad to the same children.
Yeah, and we may be interrupted by our kids who are upstairs. So that'll happen to all of us, right? So EmbraceRace is a community of support for parents, for grandparents, for tias, for tios, for teachers, for folks who are concerned about kids and want to raise kids that are informed, thoughtful, and brave about race. This conversation is part of our Talking Race and Kids series, which is a regular series and a great way to meet some folks who come regularly and to be part of an ongoing conversation about race in our country, in our world, and with our kids. So we're really excited about tonight's conversation about moving moving from the talk to the walk for Black children in particular, although some of what we talk about will, or a lot of it will apply to other kids as well. So hang in for that. They're both psychologists who we've worked with before and really like. Hence,
hey to you, Riana.
And they focus their work on Black families and kids. And they are concerned about they want us to be concerned or reconsider what we're concerned. And we'll talk for half an hour and then we'll get to your questions.
And unfortunately, about this, I'm hoping that the video is disabled for attendees. Are you able to hear me? Okay. Can you just give us a word? I see yes, yes. Okay, good. Hopefully that'll stay true. Sounds like a couple of people have had some problems.
Can you see us now? Yes, hear you and see you. Great. Okay.
So let me introduce our guests. First, Riana Anderson is an assistant professor in the Department of Health Behavior and Health Education at the University of Michigan School of Public Health. Riana studies racial discrimination and socialization in Black families to reduce racial stress and trauma and improve psychological well-being and family functioning. She's a co-creator of the video series and podcast, Our Mental Health Minute. But as you now know, her biggest claim to fame is that she appreciates my dad jokes. Don't even lie, Riana. Don't pretend.
The mock one, I actually laughed out loud.
That's what I'm saying. Thank you for the appreciation. Thank you very much. Dr. Shawn C.T. Jones is an assistant professor in the counseling program in the psychology department at Virginia Commonwealth University. Shawn seeks to improve the psychosocial well-being of Black youth and is particularly interested in the interplay between racism-related stress and racial socialization processes. With Riana, he is a co-creator of the video series and podcast, Our Mental Health Minute.
Yeah.
And in fact, we'd like to start with one of those mental health minutes. The dedication that they begin with at the very beginning is a little bit soft, but it'll get louder very quickly.
And it might be more our mental health 3 minutes.
This session is dedicated to the youth who have been killed by discriminatory practices, including
Laquan McDonald,
Tamir Rice,
Ayanna Stanley Jones,
Michael Brown,
Trayvon Martin.
Oh man,
Reed, what's got you worked up today?
Man, it's another one of these headlines talking about a young kid killed by a police officer or a dang on vigilante.
Man, I don't know what it would have been like to have race all in our face like that growing up.
You mean like the O.J. Simpson trial or the L.A. riots or Rodney King?
Snap, man. I didn't even think about the fact that young kids can pick up on race like that.
Yeah, I mean, by 3, kids are starting to see differences in the race. By 7, they're making meaning of those differences. And by 10, they're starting to think about their own role in that difference.
If only there were a way for parents and children to talk about race effectively.
But there is. So racial socialization is all about the way that parents teach kids about the racial world around them.
Okay, I'm not exactly sure I follow. What do you mean by the whole socialization thing?
Yeah, well, you know how we tell kids to look both ways before they cross the street or not to talk to strangers, right? So racial socialization is about race specifically. I bet you can even think about a few things that your families told you about what to do when you were growing up. Think about cultural socialization or pride.
You mean like celebrating Kwanzaa or going to the African American Museum or singing songs like, say it loud, woo, I'm black and I'm proud.
Yep, that's it. How about preparation for bias?
You know what? Every time I get in the car, I can hear my mom's advice telling me where to put my hands if I ever get pulled over. 10 and 2.
And yet we've seen plenty of evidence that shows even when we follow these rules in every situation, it doesn't work every time.
Yeah, so what about like when people get upset when things do actually happen?
Well, that's also type of a socialization, right? So we call that promotion of distrust. It's when stuff happens and we want to pass that distrust down to our kids.
I've heard some people go in the opposite direction. I mean, talking about the fact that race doesn't even matter at all anymore.
Yeah, well, that's our last category, right? So some people call it post-racial, some people call it egalitarianism, but it's all about being equal despite race.
I mean, that's a ton of strategies. I mean, so which one should we choose?
Yeah, well, the good thing is you don't have to choose just one. Most parents do a blended approach, but it's about the type of blend that makes sense. So preparation for bias and pride messages together typically yield better psychological, academic, and identity outcomes for youth.
So what should we be telling youth who need to know about the world around them?
Well, the good thing is we should be talking to youth, right? So kids are totally observant. They're seeing these headlines. They're not missing it. So we need to be talking to our kids first and foremost. And we need to be providing them, again, with those blended messages, pride and preparation, messages and activities, so that we can let our kids know that being Black is a beautiful thing, even when other people don't think so. I'm Ree.
And I'm CT.
And this is our Mental Health Minute.
You are young, give me plan. We must begin to tell our young.
That was awesome.
So that is outstanding.
Yeah.
So you guys apparently didn't get the memo that academics, that scholars, that researchers are not supposed to be funny,
Yeah, no.
much less informative and funny.
And accessible, no.
I mean, you definitely didn't get that memo, Andrew, because you're just funny all the time. So,
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
So let's start from some of the basics, right?
Okay.
Racial socialization, especially of Black kids in families. You're both doing this. You've dedicated your careers, your young careers so far to this work. Shawn, let's start with you, but we'd like to hear from both of you. Why this work?
Yeah, absolutely. So first of all, again, I actually want to say a couple of quick things. So the first is, Rhea and I are such a good pair because she loved the skeleton joke and I love the tense joke. That's the one that I was laughing out loud on. So that just goes to show that we're two people in the five.
Two kinds of people in this world.
Exactly. Right. But speaking of people, right, honestly, for me, the reason why I have, and I love that idea of dedicating my young career to this work is for my people, right? And when I say my people, I mean that in many different senses of the word, right? And so as a young Black boy raised in San Antonio, Texas, right, I can vividly remember the messages that I got from my mother, who is now no longer with us. She has transitioned. My grandmother, my aunts, so many great matriarchs in my family that really did their best to keep me safe, to keep me edified, to tell me I was young, gifted, Black, beautiful, all of those things, and to, yes, prepare me for the biases that I may face, right? And so the idea that I can study that, to deepen that work, to help other families do that work as effectively as possible, to continue to love on their children in the same way, to me, it's the way that I kind of give back to my family, my village, my ancestors.
Beautiful. Ree, what are you thinking?
you want me to follow that? That's what
Yep.
Okay.
Yep, you know you can.
Okay. No, so Shawn and I talk about this quite a bit, our origin story and the why. And so my story is very similar in that I'm born and raised, well, I say born and raised for and returned to Detroit. So Detroit is the love of my life, and it is a place that I grew up. And like other environments where certain environmental impacts can really steer and create a trajectory for your wellness. I was in a situation where, you know, my mother said very clearly, don't go around the corner. I need to be able to see you. I need to have hands and eyes on you at all times. And so I was in an environment where my mother, my grandmother, my grandfather were people who just absolutely said, we need to be able to see you. We need to be able to protect you. So this idea of protection and working with me to create my best environment inside of a house or with other people who they trusted in that way was a really important protective factor for me. And so I knew that family was important. And I really appreciate the way that you all started with who you were. So I am biracial, I am Black and Greek, and culture was something that was incredibly important for me from the beginning. So you see behind me, there's, you know, all this Black stuff. In my house, there was, I mean, Maasai warriors on the wall, or we spoke Swahili on our answering machine. It was important from day one to understand our culture. And my father, who I did not grow up with, but is Greek, made sure that I understood our culture as well, our heritage. And so understanding the protective benefit of culture and the protective benefit of family, you put those two things together, and it's what I'm all about today.
Beautiful.
That's really great to start. So that video was amazing. And you guys have been doing those since like 4 years or something, right? About? Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. Well, we had some beta ones that were shot in some libraries over.
We gotta see those. We gotta see those. Yeah.
No one has.
That's the after show. That's after. Yeah.
We need some outtakes.
But so you talk about in that particular one, it was a great setup to talk about these 4 strategies for parenting, right? Or for parenting around race. So I wonder Riana, we based the title of the session, Moving from the Talk to the Walk, on a piece that you wrote. So I'm wondering if you could just explain a bit, maybe perhaps using those 4 ideas of how strategies for socialization in your answer, if that makes sense.
Sure. And let me just say that the title, as most things that I've done that are, quote, good, come from conversations that Shawn and I have. So I always have to credit him. I remember having that aha moment when we were coming up with these strategies of like, how do we describe this to people? Because it's always about the talk, and people have been, in the past month, I know that EmbraceRace, I know that a lot of media platforms have been asking about, what do we say to our kids? What is the talk? Like, what is it that we should say for this one time? And if Shawn and I had that answer, we'd be very rich. You could not afford us on this webinar. It would just be a whole thing, right? Very famous and rich. There is no one thing to say. So let me just clarify briefly, and then maybe I can pass it off to Shawn to talk a bit more about the walking strategy. So the talk and what we were sharing in the video is that over the past 40 years, what the literature and what our research has shown is that there are 4 common strategies that Black families typically use when they're having racial conversations with their children. So the first is this idea of cultural socialization or pride. And so that's where Shawn indicates going to the African American History Museum or singing songs like Say It Loud, I'm Black and I'm Proud. Then there's this concept of preparation for bias. So where do I put my hands? Do I take my hoodie off? Do I go into stores that, you know, people are looking at me in a certain way? And what are the behaviors or the things that I can do to prepare for the bias that I'm anticipating in the world? The next 2 strategies are the ones that don't show as much efficacy and as much strength relative to the first 2. So promotion of distrust or mistrust, you can imagine that you've had an experience as a parent, because you're human too, right? You are, as a parent, you are a human being first and foremost. Before you have to parent anyone else, you have to take care of yourself. So if you think back to some of the experiences that you had growing up, or shoot, maybe something that happened just the other day to you, you have to think about, how am I going to tell my child messages about that experience? And then for some parents, it's, well, then you can't trust any of those people. So it generalizes then to a whole group of folks that parents don't think their children should trust. Again, makes a lot of sense. We don't take anything away from parents believing that. It's just that sometimes those outcomes, as you can imagine, might be a little more anxious or depressive for those kids, because they have so much weight from what you just told them about not being able to trust a whole group of people. And the last category briefly is egalitarianism. You can call it post-racial, you can call it colorblind, but it's really about, we don't have to worry about this whole racial thing. We're all good, everybody's equal. That has demonstrated actually some pretty good effects at first. And then when the child actually faces discrimination or racism, you can imagine that dissonance of like, I thought my parents told me this, but this is the way that the world really is. And that's psychologically challenging for kids. So that's what the talk is. Would it be okay to kick it to Shawn for what the walk is?
Yeah, and actually, I wonder, Shawn, if I can ask you, or we can come back to it if that makes more sense. But promotion of distrust and preparation for bias, can sound similar, right? So I wonder if just so we're clear on the conceptual differences between, if you could say a little bit more about what distinguishes those two.
Yeah, I'm happy to talk about that. So one of the biggest distinguishing factors between promotion of mis or distrust and preparation for bias. So think about promotion of mistrust as you literally like a message that says you just can't trust them.
Mm-hmm.
You just got to stay away. Right. It's this idea of, as Ree spoke to, right, this wariness that you're just saying, nope, just stay away from those folks. Just stay away. Right. Whereas with preparation for bias or racial barrier messages, as they're also sometimes called, we tend to see a little bit more of this kind of more active, or this more kind of what to do about that. Right. So it's not just, you may face barriers of many kinds, and when you do, right, this is how you respond, or this is why you should, wear a hoodie, or this is why you should put your hands there. Not just these kind of broad general messages, but more kind of drilled down, kind of instructive in some ways, right, is one way to think about one of the distinctions between those two types of messages. Hopefully that clarifies things.
That is helpful. Yeah, and the walk. Tell us, what is this walk?
Yeah, so again, I thank you so much. My colleague she's so generous. That's why I've loved working with her for a decade. So as she kind of set up, right, over the last 40 years, we're really thankful that we can understand and really catalog those different types of talks. And so now, right, we're in a stage, right, we're in addition, right, the question that we are starting to, and have been over the last several years, to ask back when folks say, what do I say, is how, right? The walk is the how do I do that, right? How do I, as a parent, a caregiver of a precious Black child, how am I able to competently, right? We talk about this as racial socialization competency. How am I able to do this in a way that feels good for me, that feels I feel like I have efficacy. I feel like I'm able to actually talk to my children in ways that they can understand. My children also, as a result, feel like they're more equipped. They feel like they have the toolkit, so to speak, to be able to go out and actually navigate these things, right? I'm not stressed. I'm not daunted by the task of saying, I have to talk to Susie about what happened to Brother Floyd, and I'm shaking in my boots, right? Because I'm still processing it. I'm still making sense of it. The walk is, how do we start to help parents, caregivers do that work competently, right? So let's tether to what you specifically say and how you do it, right? With affection, with efficacy, with confidence, with skills, and hopefully in a way that reduces your stress.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So I know we're going to get to the what that looks like, right? I wonder though, Reef, if I can come back to you on, you said an interesting thing around racial pride and preparation for bias as sort of stronger, right? And can you say more about what you mean by that, to say that they're sort of, I take it, more effective strategies than the other two, and how do we know that?
And maybe an example of how you use them together.
Oh, wow. Just keep adding things.
And
I'll see. Okay, so when we're talking about the strength, there are a few ways that we can measure this. So one is this idea of frequency, which is something that the literature has looked at quite a bit over the past 40 years. So how do we by either observation or asking from a survey, like how often might you say something like this to your child? And there might be a number of like endorsing statements that people might check off and say, oh, I do that very frequently, or I do it like 4 or 5 times out of the 6-month period. So people are able to quantify just how frequently folks are saying that to their child. So that's one way that we're talking about strength. Another is to think about from a profile approach, and this is something that a lot of our mentors and colleagues have been utilizing, to think about if we cluster those 4 different strategies in ways that indicate maybe a high frequency of the first 2, so cultural socialization and preparation for bias, and maybe lower frequencies of the other, and we use that cluster approach to predict psychological wellness in kids. So maybe said another way, if you want to figure out what are the variables, what are the best ways of having a child that has lower depression or lower anxiety, then some of the strategies that our mentors have been thinking about is, oh, we'll just use a lot of this. So say this more frequently and say these things less frequently. So both those cluster and the frequency approaches have been able to predict or to show us what are the best psychological outcomes that pair with how frequently or in what manner you might cluster these strategies. So the way that you might go about doing this, to your last point, so how would you walk that out, right? It might be a question that is asked about this. If we're talking about it just from the approach standpoint and we're not looking at it from the how yet, or like the walk yet, then you might say something along the lines of, as we did in the video, I'm really excited to take you to the African American History Museum today. Our history is such a rich and wonderful place or space to be in. I really love learning more about who we are. You are so beautiful. I'm really excited for you to see other people that look like you. You know, sometimes your beauty is so resplendent. It is so brilliant. It's so fantastic that people might not be able to take it all in. So your hair, the way that it curls so perfectly, and the way that we lovingly condition it and give it strength at night by braiding it and protecting it, you know, sometimes people don't understand just how complex and wonderfully made that is. And they might point or they might talk about you in a very disparaging way. When that happens, I'm wondering if there are things that we might be able to say to protect our heart, to protect our spirit. I might say something like, well, I know you are, so what am I? Or I might say something like, you just don't understand how beautiful I am, and walk away. What do you think you might want to do? So that's how we would blend some of those things. And that couples not only just the talk or like the what, but some of the things that Shawn was saying, you know, how do we walk that out? If I have confidence in what I'm saying because I've practiced it, clearly, you know that I've practiced what I just said a lot because it just came off the top and I'm able to give it to you today. That has taken us to write it. That's taken us to speak it to each other. That's taken me to say it in webinars. I literally practice what I'm going to say so that it sounds good. So that's a part of my competency. It is a skill that I've developed. I'm now confident when you ask me questions like that I can deliver it on the spot. And my stress as a result is reduced. I'm not sweating up a storm. I'm not feeling like, oh my gosh, what did they just call on me? And I'm not prepared. I've done this before. So that's part of the competency. I've taken the elements of the talk and I've now figured out what skills do I need to have to deploy it? Do I have enough confidence to deliver it well? And am I stress-free enough to deliver it in a way that my child is going to receive it?
So I wonder, I mean, I think that sometimes people think that that families of color and Black families are so good at all this, you know, and sort of don't get stressed about it. So I wonder, maybe Shawn, you could tell us a little bit about, you know, in your research and your, you know, in what you're seeing, you know, what's really true there.
Yeah, I think that's such an important question, Elyse. So first of all, anyone out there, PSA, yes, parents of color, Black parents, I am not one, but I work with many, right? Yes, they get stressed, right? Going back to what Reese said, you are a human being first, and you have to, we've all had to exist for as long as we have been fortunate enough to be on this planet, we've had to exist in our skin and in our context. And that has come with our own experiences. And so for those of us among us, right, who have the honor and the privilege, right, of being caregivers, of being parents, we're saying, you know, walk through your own experiences, perhaps the own racial, discrimination that you faced, perhaps the messages that you've received, both positive and negative, right? And now all of a sudden we want you to turn around and like implant all of that into your youth so that they are healthy and strong and can make it out the door and make it back home safely, right? I don't know about you, but even just talking about that is stressful, right? So this idea that families are able or should be able, right, just dry along so, I don't even know what that actually means, but my grandmama used to say it all the time. Just any old kind of way, right? Be able to just do this work without stress, right? I think we have to be careful about that because it's almost imposing this almost kind of superhuman quality on our parents, right? Our parents of color, our Black parents, to say, yeah, life hasn't been a crystal stair for you and it's not going to be for your child, but just do this and it should be fine. Why are you stressing about that, right? What we know is that, and what we've actually been able very recently to kind of distill and part out, is that when we as parents to talk about their stress when it comes to talking to their children about race, we're seeing that there's this kind of distinction between there are some kind of general stress about talking to their children about race. And then there is what we have called, Dr. Anderson, myself, and our mentor, what we're calling call to action stress, which is where we're really saying, okay, we really need you to specifically teach a strategy or really like teach your child how to, as Dr. Anderson just did, talk back to the person who fails to see the brilliance of your skin tone or your hair texture. And so we know that there are distinctions, right? We have been able to quantitatively distill between different types of stressors or different aspects of the racial socialization process that might be stressful for Black parents, right? And so the work, I'm definitely never going to take my colleague's thunder, so I'm going to give her this lovely alley-oop, but there's a program that I think she might talk about perhaps that, is actually equipped to help parents through practice, parents and families, parents, children together and individually work through their competency so that they arrive on the other side, so that we over time, through practice, through exercises, through discussion, through psychoeducation, can reduce that stress, right? We know that parents have to do this, but we also don't want to burden them. Additionally, we want to find ways that we can help them do this very important work, right, in ways that also is not, causing their heart to jump out of their chest.
Exactly. Yeah.
So Shawn just like dished it to you right under.
Yeah.
Right?
What's it called? What's your program called?
Hey, wait, by any chance, do you have?
Oh my gosh. Okay, I have to tell people the story because that's the only way that we can get this appropriately. So I was on the job market a few years ago, and I was out and about whatever city I was, and I came back, and my research lab was like, Dr. Anderson, we have something to tell you. And I was like, who perished? Like, everybody looked so stressed out, and I was like, yes, guys, what's going on? They were like, there's a group called EmbraceRace, and they do like really similar stuff to you. And I was like, okay. So we looked it up, and essentially my lab was trying to find something about my program, which is called the Embrace program. And they found something about EmbraceRace and found these two amazing folk over here with a whole community of parents who are doing kick tush stuff. And they were like, it's so similar. Like, we have to rename our
program. And it turned out not to be that scary. Am I right? Not so scary. Not so scary.
They were, you guys are a little scary, but the point was that our programs were both trying to figure out what to do about race. And so the Embrace program stands for Engaging, Managing, and Bonding Through Race. So Embrace. And when you put those elements together, the engaging, like how do we talk about racial socialization stuff, like comfortably, right? How do we have confidence when we talk about it? How do we have confidence when we engage? Management is stress reduction. So how do we talk about these things and reduce our stress in the process? And the B, the bonding part, how do we continue to be a family that relates well together throughout this challenging thing? So it's really taking the skills that we brought up with racial socialization competency, stress skills, confidence, and putting them into one program. And without going into too much detail, and I'm happy to give more information about what it is that we do, but Shawn has been a clinician, I've been a clinician on the program as well. And what we're doing is really engaging in what you all are doing already right now, which is how do we immerse ourselves in this space? How do we ask questions? How do we inquire rather than give these declarative statements that people typically want? This really easy, like, I gave the talk, I have done it, it is over, I don't have to talk to my kids about race ever again, and then they want to walk out the door. That's not what parenting is about, right? Like, we're constantly doing challenging things with our family. You have to tell your kids 78 times to buckle your seatbelt. So why would it be any different with anything else? And as they develop, they're going to ask different questions and be aware of different things. So what Embrace is trying to do is to make it more normal to talk about, to practice, to think, to ask questions, to engage in this dialogue, to find things like books that you can ask questions about, and it can be a resource for you, to look at the media and create questions that come from that. So we take all of these different tools and have families to work through some of these skills so that at the end of the day, your family unit is what's going to create healing and wholeness within your family.
Mm-hmm. And let me ask a particular slice on that, which is, we know, and I'm sure that you find too, that when people talk about our work, when people approach and sort of try to characterize our work, so many go straight to the what do you say to your child, right? Mm-hmm. And of course that's important, and of course it's not the only thing that's important. Some would say it's not even the most important thing, or it's really interactive, right? What you say, what you model. Can you say a little bit about, give us some examples of what the modeling looks like, right? So so we can raise awareness about it's not only what you say.
For me, it really is so question-based. So we do have a manual, and we have our clinicians ask questions or say things, but it's really about the level of inquiry that we can start with our children. So again, the media in the past month has just been bananas with like, how do you talk to your kids about race? And I've been interviewed so many times, and I start the same way, which is that if you can ask your child what they noticed, whether they're 3, 17, it doesn't matter. If you ask your child, tell me what it is that you saw, you're going to get data, you're going to get a baseline, you're going to get an understanding of where your child is at. And then you can respond based on what it is that your child is talking about. So as an example, we again use a lot of free resources because that is what we want people to have available. There is a New York Times op-doc series in which they show children and they show parents talking about race. And in one of those videos, a child is talking about his experience of feeling hunted, right? And so he uses this term, and it's really visceral, and we have the families watch it. And so we've just selected that term, and we ask the parents, how does it feel to hear a child talk about being hunted? And then we ask the children, how does it feel to have a parent who might hear that you're being hunted? Like, what does that feel like for you to be in that situation?
How old is the child, Riana?
In that video, I think he is either 16 or 17, but the range, there's a range of like 10-year-olds to 22-year-olds in that particular video. And it's the best. You all have to check it out, and I'll put it in the chat.
Give you the link, yeah.
Yeah, as soon as I'm done talking about it. But what we're doing is saying, of a 5-minute video, we're selecting just one word, we're pulling it out, and we're asking a question about it. And you can do this when you're watching Blackish, which we love to pieces, and we absolutely use that as a strategy to create you're watching a family talk about race, now your family can talk about race kind of meta moment. So whether you're watching a sitcom or the news, as we use with our newspapers, like we're very literal about how do you take headlines, how do you do these things that are going to be commonplace in your lived experience with your family, how do you create inquiry from those types of experiences?
It's beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah, we get that all the time. Just what about my specific child? And I guess another part of it is also that I've heard you guys say or read, is that you're the expert in your child, right? So it's sort of, you don't kind of hand that over. You ask questions, and they also are the expert in how they're feeling, and and what conversations you've had before. And so it's really, it's not like one size fits all, the conversation. It really has to be very specific to the context and the people. Yeah, we have a lot of questions.
Let me start with one. Another thing that we hear often that you probably do too, Shawn, you mentioned that you're not a parent yourself. A lot of people think this is all about parents, right? So we know that, of course, parents are really important, probably especially for younger children. And there are a lot of other adults in the lives of children. And even if you're a parent, even if you're an educator, you probably wear some other hats, right, with respect to some of the lives in your the children in your lives. So can you say a little bit about, I think we have several questions around, we have one from a pediatrician, just what role, how do people who are wearing other hats think about the role that they can play?
Yeah. So the first thing that I would think about, right? So a couple of things I want to talk about. The first is, we've alluded to this often, but, I think Ree just said a beautiful thing, right? Whether you're 3 or 17, and in that you can ask those questions, but we know that the way that you might ask a 3-year-old the question and the way that you might ask your 17-year-old a question are different. And so I only say that to mention that, right, depending on where in the developmental context we're talking about, right, these other important figures of support, right, are going to hold, right, there's a difference between a coach, right? There's another clip that we really love where there is a coach and a young man named Taekwon who are having a conversation about being stopped and frisked, right, in New York. And so in that way, the coach is able to also impart and share his own experience, also provide socialization, right, that is not parental, right, but it's still certainly racial socialization and is done in an affirming and loving way. And so I would say to folks who are representative of pediatricians, of educators, I think there are a couple of things. So when it comes to specific, perhaps messaging or things that you say, I do think it is important, and we know that the literature and in terms of what we might call in terms of congruence in messaging, right, may be important. So if you have a relationship with your families, and I know for some educators, right, that's a lot of students and a lot of families to try to maybe have one-on-one conversations, right? But I do think that in terms of some of the messages that are imparted, maybe being able to have collaborative kind of team working conversations between caregivers and important others in children's lives, I think is important. The other big thing that we know in terms of racial socialization is that oftentimes it's not just what you say, it's also what is in the atmosphere, as Ree alluded to, what is in the environment, right? What is modeled. And so I also think that folks who are in roles of educators and pediatricians and spaces like that is, what is your space? What is your space saying about race? We've had a lot of conversations recently about the notion of anti-Blackness and how anti-Blackness can be things that people say, but also in the culture and in the structure and in the space. And so I think maybe considering ways in which there are modeling of images that, show people of different skin tones and colors that are represented in certain spaces, right? Having those sorts of, maybe we might call them behavioral or symbolic messages that are available in your child's world or in the children who you come across world, I think are also some important things. And I'll stop now to kind of allow for some follow-up. Yeah.
Just a 30-second quick follow-up on that. So the Embrace program actually does think about the clinician as a component here. So we are absolutely not racial, contextual. It is impossible to not bring our own bias into the room as we are working with our clients. So for anyone who is interested in clinical implications please feel free to follow up with me as well, because we do study that, and we do have some data indicating how a program like Embrace can actually build competency in providers themselves.
So we have a lot of questions about, in these times, about kids at various ages who, mostly younger, who are afraid about Black kids, about Latino kids who are afraid to go outside because of police. And I hear that sort of anecdotally a lot. And I just wonder if you're seeing that and what you would say. You've said so many great things, but maybe you want to emphasize a few.
So I'll jump in quickly, Shawn. It is a point here of normalizing and respecting what might be fearful for children and parents. Frankly, that's really what we're talking about, is like, how do we reduce fear and be honest in ways that show balance? And that's really what a lot of our work has been about. So I think the important piece is being honest with our children in developmentally appropriate ways. So if you have a 3-year-old, the discussion of the United States as a capitalist racist society that does X, Y, and Z, maybe, it might be a little premature. And so you might have to think about, what are the things that they do understand? So again, elicit from them, what do you know? What do you see? What's around you? And if they're able to talk about someone who drinks chocolate milk and that's why they're brown, or someone who does X, Y, and Z and that's why they're this, then they have some conceptualization of how to discriminate amongst characteristics or groups, right? So you can build from that and talk at their level there. But again, based on the research that we know, if we only use distrustful messages, or if we validate, no, you can't trust that person because, or the police officer in this case, because of X, Y, and Z, we're really prone to drive depression and anxiety outcomes in negative ways. So we may want to validate it is totally normal to fear, that you've seen it a lot on TV, and that can really make us think that it's happening a lot more frequently than it is. We know so many people that have had interactions and have not experienced the same type of outcome as George Floyd or Rashard Brooks. So it could be a scary place, but it's not as common as we might think. And I want you to go out and enjoy your day, because you have so much of the world to explore and to enjoy. So that might be a way that I create balance. How about you, Shawn?
Yeah,
absolutely.
Let me interrupt real quick, Shawn, because I do want to come to you on that. I want to press on a particular point. So, because we know that. So Riana, I totally hear what you're saying, and of course that makes sense. And that issue of on one hand being honest with our children, and but staving off fear, not having them be overly anxious, all of that. That's clearly important. And we also know that a lot of parents, especially white parents of white children, but not only white parents of white children, can use that as what looks like an excuse not to have the conversation, right? Like, we're going to protect the racial innocence, the racial sort of naivete of our children. We're going to, we're not going to go there because, boy, aren't they going to engage that later on? And, we want to save this precious childhood time. And I also think, gosh, well, the world, there are parts that are hard. There's some hard bits. And surely there's a place for saying, even with your quite young child, it is a little scary. Yeah. And somehow the question, it feels to me, is, let's, you can see me be upset. Right. And I'll tell you why.
How do you manage your big feelings? How do you deal with them?
But allow the feelings, right? So I just wonder if you, again, it's more in the gray area, what's the line you cross. I just wonder if you have any wisdom for us there, Shawn.
You do, Shawn.
Come on, Shawn.
So the thing is, and I already know this about you all, but that's so spot on, right? And so a big portion of what you just said, which is, and normalize, not just normalize the idea that, police can be scary, but also saying, look, I'm a little scared. I'm a little angry about this. As your parent, I'm nervous, right? Being able to actually be honest and look into your child's eyes and say, look, I know, again, that's that idea, right? We have this idea sometimes of that kind of parents, caregivers as super people, right? And it in a world where, right, there is dehumanization on one hand, right? One of the things that we can do sometimes is go the opposite way and go super, 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 saying superhuman on the other, right? And in the midst of either extreme, we lose humanity. And so the opportunity to sit with your child, to cry with your child, to hug on your child, to say, I'm scared too, baby, or I'm scared too, baby, and we're gonna be all right. And adding in those messages, I think is so important, right? And so those big feings, are really important to share because they help with connection. And the other thing, and this sort of speaks to what you raised in the first part of your reaction, Andrew, is we don't give, and I know again, I know I'm not a parent out there, but I know many of you all who know this probably, that we don't always give youth the credit that they deserve for picking up on stuff. And so sometimes we think, well, if I just don't talk about it, they're not going to see me cry, right? And we see it in so many other spaces where the child says, Mommy, I heard you crying last night, or Dad, I see that you're mad, and you thought you were doing the best job of hiding that, right? And so we know that that's another aspect that children pick up on that. And so we think, right, that it's better to be, again, developmentally appropriate and using, as you said, Melissa, using yourself as the expert of knowing your child and your family context, but also being honest and sharing. And then the last thing that I'll add to that is also to do that work, not just parent to child, but some of the research that I do is also saying, how are the adult caregivers having those conversations? How are we talking about how we're both feeling and what that means about how we want to raise our children together, right? And that can be any constellation of adult caregivers, but also having those very real conversations about our own experiences, our own feelings, our own hurts, our own lessons learned.
Can I just tell you, Melissa, as a question, but can I just tell you, I just love, again, with the caveats, with, there's nuance there, but I just love the be honest when you can, right? Like start there.
Because they know if you say, oh, you're going to be okay, and you're terrified, and your kid's going to pick up on that, your kid's going to be terrified, like more terrified, right? Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, I wondered, did you have something to add?
Nope, go right ahead.
I wondered a bit about, again, going back to that video, the great video, and there's so many more. We are going to give everybody all the links. And about those, there were 2 preferred strategies and 2 less preferred, the promotion of distrust and the egalitarian. And sometimes I wonder when I hear those 4, why even mention the other, the ones that are less effective. And I'm guessing maybe it's because we actually all do use those strategies in different, like it's very hard because, to Shawn's point, you're a human being, right? You end up like sometimes just being like, this is what they're like, whoever. And so you have those kind of human moments, or with the egalitarian, it can be kind of, sometimes you want that to be true, like, oh, maybe, I'm not entirely sure, but I wonder why keep them in the model.
It's beautiful. I'll address it pretty quickly. First of all, I think your reviewer 2 on the papers that we sent out, because the reviewer 2 is always the one who has like all the critical stuff. And so they're always like, well, why do you do that strategy? Let me tell you, Melissa and other reviewers out there. So again, just to be clear, when we talk about the 4 strategies, these are not things that we recommend. These are the things that are occurring. So those are frequencies, and people are observing the ways that people are using the strategy. To your point, this idea of hopefulness is such a robust association with things like egalitarianism. And let me tell you who uses it the most, and you all will be probably shocked by this. Black dads use egalitarianism the most. And we know, and still not a lot, but they use it more, Andrew, they use it more than mothers or folk of other backgrounds. And the why, even though we know that Black men face discrimination, or at least they report facing it more frequently and with more bother than Black women, it's this idea of, well, maybe my child doesn't have to grow up in a world like I did, and maybe they won't get pulled over, and maybe this will be the generation to what Embrace Race is about, right? Like maybe this will be the generation that is not facing discrimination, but that's not the case, right? And so why we would use those strategies, why we would have a full session devoted in the Embrace program, for example, to talking about distrust and to talking about egalitarianism, is to the last point, which was we want to make sure that we are validating what people are experiencing. It is completely natural to not want to mess with any police officers walking down the street after someone just kneeled on someone's neck for 8 minutes and 46 seconds. I don't want to talk to you. I don't want to see you. I don't want to see your car. I don't want to hear a siren. I don't want any of that. You just snuffed out the life of my brother. I don't want to deal with you. And if you listen to Shawn and I's podcast, like immediately after this thing occurred, and we're supposed to be on break this summer, we ain't supposed to be doing none of this. We filmed a 45-minute podcast, and our anger and our frustration was just visceral. It was just coming out. And that is the case with Black Americans, and frankly, people across the world demonstrating how upset they are at police injustice right now. It is only human to feel that way. So why would we as parents, and I keep saying we like I got a kid, but why would we as people who have children in our sphere not want them to see and feel that anger? So that's one. We keep it around to keep us human. But because we know that it's a natural reaction and people would want to say, don't bang with them, or baby, it's okay, like none of that's gonna matter your generation, we have to be able to ask the parents, tell me a bit about why you wanna use that strategy. And then they'll unpack it. And they'll say, well, I think it's important for my kid not to know about race. Well, actually, the data show this. And actually, your child has already told us this in the prior sessions. So now with that information, is that something that you still want to use? And again, it's an inquiry-based for us. We're not telling them you can't use it or you should use X, Y, and Z. We're saying with this information, do you think that's the way you would want to go? If not, and our question for both of those sessions, if not, what do you think the balance would be? What would a better strategy be? And we're still putting that onus and that power back in the hands of the parent.
Shawn, I'm coming to you. I got to tell you, we're just loving you guys, right? So first of all, you start out with the humor. You start out with the humor. You're not supposed to do that because you're academics, your scholars, your research, not supposed to do it. And then
that's a broad brush.
And then I'm gonna go that brush. I'm gonna use that brush. Yeah. And then you do your podcast and you're talking about like letting your anger show, which again, we know that, right? The Academy is supposed to leach all emotion out of your work. And certainly anger, right, is largely rendered, there's an effort to render anger invalid, even though we're so often dealing with things that if you can't be upset about that, I don't know what you can be upset about. Really glad to hear it. Shawn, I want to come to you. Of course, feel free to add on the previous bit. There's a whole cluster of questions. A lot of folks in our community, the EmbraceRace community, who are white parents of Black identified children. And so we have a whole bunch of questions around, is there something I need to know, some sort of adjustment?
Either biologically or transracially adopted.
Yeah, absolutely. Or foster parents.
Yeah.
Is there something I need to know as a white parent to this child of color and this Black child in particular I love to, as I come into this work and hear what you're saying?
Yeah, so I would say to that, so the first thing I want to say, I love this question, and I always want to make sure that I properly contextualize this question, because the earnest focus of my work thus far, has really centered on thinking about the Black family. And I could talk about that forever, and we don't have forever, so I won't do that. But I can still speak to, and there is definitely resources for white parents of Black children out there. First of all, I think it's important to ask this question: is there anything that I need to do, right? So one of the first things that I would say is that the idea of socialization, of racial socialization, is something that all parents, I believe, that all parents need to do. So white parents of white children, right? Also, it is important for them to also engage around racial socialization, right? To interrogate those those same sorts of elements or aspects of privilege, of oppression, of, anti-Blackness as it has come up, and allies, right? These different elements as well. So it may look a little different, but racial socialization, I would argue, is something that all families should engage in, although the texture and tenor and tone of that is gonna look different across swathings, so to speak, right? I think one of the important things is, and I do this work often when I talk with parents, and particularly in some of the kind of interracial dyads that I have worked with, which is this idea of, I don't have that experience. And so I, maybe need to find someone else who looks like them, who does have that experience, so that they can talk to them. And I would say to that element or aspect, or if that is out there at all, right, is that it's important to also interrogate how you understand and feel and make meaning of racism, privilege, oppression first, right? Again, that idea, going back to what my very dope sister said at the beginning, right? We're human first. So I think the first important thing is to make sure that you interrogate those things for yourself and how you feel and what you've learned about race, what have you. And then also in the same way, right, to have those honest conversations, right? To not steer away from, difference, to not paint with the brush of colorblindness per se, but to say, hey, baby, we're different. And, I'm your mom, or I'm your father, I'm your tia, but we're different, and explaining and unpacking that and being honest about that as well, I think is really critical and crucial. So I'll stop there to
like 15 seconds.
Mm-hmm.
So it's about the child too. So a lot of parents stop short because they're like, oh, well, I don't know, I don't have the experience, as Shawn was saying.
Mm-hmm.
But your child is going to face racial discrimination. And so the question is, how can you be the best supportive system for them to ensure that what discrimination does, which is to break down virtually every single psychological, physiological, physical, academic, we can name every single outcome that discrimination messes up, but it's a lot of them. So if you don't want discrimination to jack your kid up, which left alone it might do, you want to intervene, and that intervention is racial socialization. Very briefly too, Shawn was saying that every parent should racially socialize. Every parent does racially socialize. So if you're quiet, if you're not saying anything about race, you are socializing your child to believe that the world can do its worst to your child, and that you're not going to do anything about it, and that people like you aren't going to do anything about it either. So it's incredibly important for you to verbalize and to explicitly indicate how you feel and how you want your child to feel about race.
That's beautiful. We don't have much time here, but we do have several questions about Black families with Black kids, concerned about how to talk to people who live or who work in white institutions that the family's interfacing with, right? So how do, it can be hard. I mean, part of why you want everyone to be intentional about their socialization is that, we're concerned if our kids' friends live in homes where they're not being social, we worry about them going there, or if there's not intention, you worry about what your kid's going to encounter in that home or at school or whatever it is. So what's the conversation? What are that you can have to not offend the teacher, but to make sure the teacher's still nice to your kid, but to sort of make it better in these times?
And we only have a minute, but I want to pick up specifically on the thing, Shawn, that you said, right, which is the need to coordinate, right? So how do you coordinate with a teacher if you're a parent? How do you coordinate with a white teacher if you're a Black parent of a Black child? 30 seconds.
30 seconds.
Yeah, that might be.
Go, Shawn, go.
Ooh, all right. I mean, quick, like bear attacks, I would say, okay, so brass tacks, sorry. I would say okay, so in the same way that we might think about, okay, a parent-teacher conference where we're talking about grades and GPA and extracurriculars. You know, I think that, and I think this is tricky. I do not want to dismiss that, but I think having a conversation also just about with the teacher about, well, what sorts of things when it comes to matters of race in this classroom or in these spaces or in this school, what asking questions, right? And then from those questions, then maybe kind of engaging and integrating kind of your perspective. Well, I just want to let you know that at home, it's important for us to also talk to our children about ABC 1, 2, 3. And so, you know, just so that there's kind of that mutual kind of understanding, and that you also understand what kind of socialization is happening in those spaces. That's what I got in 30 seconds. Sorry.
That was a great answer.
30 seconds.
That wasn't fair at all.
Riana, we're giving you 15 if you want to get any last word.
So again, your family unit, that dyad or the larger unit, is effectively the most important and powerful unit that can come about. If you practice enough with each other, and literally in the Embrace program, we have like a letter from a teacher said this. And I was a former first grade teacher, fifth grade teacher myself, so I know that these things exist. If you practice enough in group, you take that into your classroom, the child is in there, the child is able to exert and to assertively state, this is what I know. And then they can bring that back home and say, Mom, this is what happened. Dad, this is what happened. And then you all, again, as a unit can go and address that. I yearn for the day that we have systems that are going to protect and to promote our kids. But unfortunately, it is not what we're going to be seeing anytime soon. And hopefully we can make that change. But you have to prepare and practice with your kid enough to be assertive and vocal so that you all can get your needs met, whether it's them in the classroom setting or you after that.
Beautiful.
Amen. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thanks to everyone who's on.
Great conversation. A lot of wisdom there.
Yeah, and we're going to share all the ways you can find out more about these guys and our mental health minute and all of that, and we'll send you the transcript.
The humor, you got the anger, it's crazy.
You got it all. You guys are awesome. So glad.
Yeah. You got the buttons. We're both
got
out
the
here.
buttons.
Oh yeah, we don't have the buttons on.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Thank you both. Thanks to everyone who came and all the
buttons.
questions. And I'm sorry we couldn't begin to get to all of them, but hopefully, I suspect you took a lot away from what Riana and Shawn had to say.
Yeah, that was
Thank
awesome,
you both
guys.
so much for your work,
Thank you.
for your humor,
Thank
for
you.
the passion, all of it.
Yeah, reach out. We're happy to address you all as well on our site. So reach out to us. Thank you both so much for having us. Thank you to EmbraceRace and to all of you for hanging out tonight.
Yeah, thank you guys. We'll have you on again.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, y'all.
Bye.
Bye-bye, folks.
Good night.